Hello Year 7. In this video we're going to be looking at how we compare quantities using fractions and ratios. Okay, we've already done a lot of work on fractions. So before we start, I'd like to pause the video and have a go at simplifying the following fractions. Excellent. These are the answers that you should have got. So that should have been pretty easy. We should all be able to simplify a fraction. Okay, so going back to the lesson today, we're going to look at what a ratio is, how we can compare quantities using fractions, and how we can compare quantities using ratios. Okay, so as always, there's a big target question. Pause the video, have a go, and I will run through the answers at the end. Excellent. Okay, so just thought I'd take a brief moment to explain to you what a ratio is, okay, because some of you would have met them before, some may not. Okay, so I've tried to explain this using very simple pictures. Here we've got a picture of some fish. There are three types. There are spots, stripes and plain. Okay, and what I've done is I've counted up how many of each fish I've got. So I've got 3 spots, 9 stripes and 12 plain fish, which gives me a total of 24. Okay, now I could either write the number of fish or the types of fish as fractions or as ratios. Okay, so if I was going to write the types of fish as a fraction, I'd write the number of fish out of the total number of fish. Okay, so for example, the number of spotted fish is 3 out of 24, striped 9 out of 24, and plain 12 out of 24. Okay, so I could write them as a fraction. I could, if I wanted, simplify the fractions. Okay, but essentially I can write the number of fish and the types of fish as a fraction. I could also write them as a ratio. Now a ratio is just a different way of writing a fraction. Okay, now in ratios we use a comma. Okay, so if I was going to write the types of different fish down as a ratio, spots to stripes to plain, doesn't have to be in that order, it can be in any order, I'd write 3 to 9 to 12. Okay, so I could write the same information as I have over here as a ratio, and if you look, those numbers are exactly the same as the numerators on the fractions. Okay, and again, I could simplify this ratio if I could find a number that went into all 3 of these numbers. Now clearly, I can divide all these 3 numbers by 3, and I could simplify each ratio from 3, 9 and 12 down to 1, 3 and 4. Okay, so I'm able to simplify a fraction, and I'm also able to simplify a ratio. Okay, and remember that a ratio is just a different way of writing a fraction. Okay, the information is just the same. Good. Okay, so we've looked at what a ratio is. We're now going to look at comparing quantities using fractions. What I've done is I've just written down some examples. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is pause the video, write down the examples, and we'll go through the answers. Brilliant. Okay, now these are typical questions. Okay, we've got questions on fractions and we've also got questions on ratios. Okay, so we'll do the fractions first. Okay, a typical question could be, write 27 as a fraction of 36. Okay, we should all know what a fraction is. Okay, so this shouldn't come as any surprise. If I was to write 27 as a fraction of 36, I'd write it in this form, 27 out of 36. Okay, and it's good practice, remember, to simplify the fraction. Okay, so 27 as a fraction of 36 simplifies to 3 over 4. Okay. A similar type of question that you might find is one like this, where we're using the same information, but it's worded differently. Okay, and it says, what fraction must you multiply 36 by to get 27? Okay, now that might seem a very difficult question. However, if we look at it, it doesn't appear to be that difficult. Okay, what fraction must you multiply 36 by to get 27? So I've written it out in mathematical form. 36 multiplied by something is 27. Okay, now think back to when we did algebra. I've replaced the multiply by something with n. Okay, it means the same thing. 36 multiplied by a number equals 27. Thinking back to when we did algebra, to find n, we do the inverse operation. The opposite, or the inverse, of multiplying by 36 is dividing by 36. N must equal 27 divided by 36. Now I could work that out as a decimal, but it wants it as a fraction. Okay, so n equals 27 over 36, or 3/4. Good. Number 3 is virtually, well, it is exactly the same as number 1. Okay, 88 out of 160, and then simplify. Okay, 88 as a fraction of 160 is 11 over 20. I could be asked, if I wanted to change this into a percentage. Okay, and again, we've covered percentages. Remember that percentage means out of 100. Okay, so all I have to do is essentially get the bottom number, the denominator, to 100. Okay, it's quite lucky that the bottom number in this case is 20. Okay, so to convert this fraction to an equivalent fraction out of 100, I multiply by 5. As soon as I've got the fraction out of 100, the numerator becomes the percentage. Okay, so 88 as a fraction of 160 is 11 over 20. 11 over 20 as a percentage is 55%. Good. Okay, so those are the questions you're going to get on comparing quantities using fractions. The questions will be on worksheet 1. Okay, so when we're coming to worksheet 2, we're going to be looking at ratios, doing the same thing but with ratios. And remember that a ratio is just another way of writing a fraction. Okay, so again, pause the video, write the examples down, and we'll go through the answers. Brilliant. Okay, so the question's a little more interesting in that we have a recipe. A recipe calls for 2.5 times as much flour as sugar. Okay, we all know what flour is, and hopefully we all know what sugar is, and we also hopefully know what this question is saying to us. Okay, so write the amount of flour to the amount of sugar as a ratio. Okay, so instead of writing it as a fraction, we're going to write it as a ratio. And all I'm going to do is rewrite the question as a ratio. So for example, I've got flour and sugar, and I've written flour and sugar because flour comes first, sugar comes second. Okay, so flour, sugar, 2.5 to 1. Okay, so there are 2.5 times more flour than there is sugar. Okay, now with ratios, it's common practice to write the numbers as decimals. You don't have to, okay, but it's a lot easier to convert these numbers here into a fraction if I need to than these numbers here. Okay, so I'm allowed to multiply by 2 or double. Okay, if I double these two numbers, I get 5 to 2. Okay, And I'm allowed to do that because I'm just effectively creating an equivalent fraction. Okay, so this here would be my answer. Okay, so every 5 parts flour, there are 2 parts sugar. Good. Okay. Now, there are 2 different types of questions that involve these numbers that you could be asked. Okay. Hopefully, I've tried to word them so that it makes sense. Okay. It says write the amount of flour and the amount of sugar as a fraction. Okay. So all I've got to do is convert this back to a fraction, thinking back to our initial questions here. I could write fractions as a ratio, which means I can write a ratio as a fraction. Okay? So, if I was to take my ratio here, 5 to 2, then if I add these 2 numbers together, the total number of parts would be 7. And if I was to write each one of these as a fraction, then flour would be 5 out of 7. The sugar would be 2 out of 7. So if I add the ratios together, I get the denominator for the fractions. Okay, so remember that a ratio is just another way of writing a fraction. And look, our numerators are our ratios, and if I add the ratios together, I get the denominator. Okay, so every 5/7 flour, there are 2/7 sugar. Another type of question would be where I compare the sugar to the flour or the flour to the sugar. Okay, now these are slightly different. Okay, hopefully it makes sense. Write the amount of sugar compared to the amount of flour as a fraction. Write the amount of sugar compared to the amount of flour as a fraction. Okay, the amount of sugar is 2 parts. The amount of flour is 5 parts. Okay, so these 2 types of questions are different, and it's in the wording. Okay, here I have a total, and here I'm writing one fraction compared to another fraction, or one quantity compared to another quantity. Okay, so just be aware of that. Now, when it comes to the questions, I'm hoping that you all know about this. Okay, we have a virtual learning zone. This is the address for that zone. When you go to it, you look at year 7 and you look at your timetable. Okay, underneath you will see all your different subjects. Obviously this is mathematics, and the worksheets for both these lessons are here. Okay, you need to log on to the virtual learning zone and retrieve the worksheets and complete them. Remember that the answers are with the worksheets. Okay. Secondly, I have placed some questions onto MathsWatch. This is the address for MathsWatch. If you are struggling to log on to MathsWatch, or you have misplaced your password and username, send me an email and I'll give you what you need. Okay? But the expectation is that you go on and you complete all the questions on MathsWatch, as well as the worksheets. Okay? Finally, hopefully you've answered this. I'm not going to dwell on this too much. This is just you writing numbers in fraction form, in ratio form. So for example, write down each of the following ratios in its simplest form. So white to blue, 200 to 60, and then you simplify. Okay, so you should have got these answers once simplified. Okay, any problems, drop me an email. If not, have a good day.